All right, and away from that, and of course, we'll be following up some of the developing stories we'll be bringing you during this live broadcast as well as in our other bulletins. But just to get into the essence of our discussion this morning, which is on the state of human resource in the country. And just to reintroduce my guest this morning, Mr. Joseph Vincent, the chairman of the Institute of Human Resources Management. Of course, that's a state agency that is supposed to regulate the HR professionals in the country. He's also the CEO of the National Police Service Commission. We have Njoroge Kiaria, who's the Career Transformation and Life Coach HR professional and CEO of Lafayette Resources, as well as Tony Watima, who's our resident economist. We'll be able to put some of these issues into perspective. Thank you again, once again. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And of course, just to start us off, we begin, Mr. Joseph, maybe when we start with the human resource capital in the country, where are we at? What is the state of the human resources state in the country?
Thank you very much, Zainab, and good morning, everyone. I can describe the current state of our human resources in a transition, in the sense that we are undergoing certain disruptions in the state in which we do work. And right now, the discussions is about what is the future of work, what is the future of human resource in this country and actually globally. So in a nutshell, the conversations today are around what are these disruptions, what is making us uncomfortable with, one, the workplace, two, the workforce, and eventually the environment or the totality of the ecosystem in the environment in which we work.
And Njoroge, what do you think has really defined the human resources profession, and what are some of those dynamics that have shaped the profession?
Thank you very much, Zainab, and good morning, everybody. I think the one thing that is constant everywhere is change. And HR as a profession has obviously not been left behind. And if I just look back years ago when I was working, the setup was very, very different. You'll be there, you're a head of HR, and you've got a team of maybe 10 people. Today, the organizations are, same organization, then you have less number of workforce in the human resources. Why? Because one thing that it has disrupted the space is technology. Because most of the jobs that would be done manually before have now been automated. So that has had a major impact in terms of how many people are actually getting employed within the HR profession.
All right, so that is a very interesting dynamic that has come to it. And Tony, just looking at the changes that, of course, are evident happening within the sphere of the human resources, in what way do you think that shapes the economic development of the country as well?
Okay. Human resource will fall under human capital itself, that you are able to produce people with the right expertise and skills that meet the demand that you have in the economy. And it's one of the biggest ingredients for an economic growth. So in the changing times that we are globally, that we are able to compete as human development capital. We are able to compete with other people in terms of expertise and skills, and that's what the main thing that gives us a competitive edge compared to other economies. So the part that human resource comes in is that it's part of human capital development for economic growth. Yes.
All right, look, you have a lot of youth who are in the Jua Kali sector, right?
Yes.
You have domestic workers, among others. And how do we start professionalizing this informal job sector to tap on that talent and manage this? Because there are a lot of young people within that sector. Have you been able to professionalize that already, and in what way can we move forward? Maybe I'll pose this question to Joseph.
Yes, indeed, it is true. And today we are looking at how, first of all, we define work. What is work? Because that is globally changing. You remember during the older days, work was defined as, what was perceived as work was really white collar. You get to the office and because you are being encouraged to read and to go to the university so that you get work. But today we are defining work quite differently because we are going towards what talent, exploitation of your talent in whatever area that is, and then we define that as work. And therefore, I'm seeing in today's nation, for example, when your house help sues you, you know, that is something that we never had before. I mean, because over and over with time, we see that work is getting redefined over a period of time. And if you look at especially the informal sector and where that is the emphasis on as a country, you can see how much emphasis we've put on the TVET, you know, as opposed to, because we've realized, like other parts of the developed world, that work is not defined today actually by just your degrees. Actually, let me put it this way, it's not defined even by knowledge, because now we have progressed and it is defined by your competency, which is ability to do. So over a period of time, you'll see industries and everybody else looking at what is this ability to do. And as employers, and I'd like to say, today we are watching, this month is our HR, we call it the HR month for the Institute of Human Resource
In fact,
Management.
I forgot to mention that.
I think that is very important so
Yes.
that we also know the kind of activities that we've lined out for this month, because we are celebrating our 32nd year since we started off. But we are looking at what are these things that we need to prepare ourselves for the future. And he's just mentioned, I think, one of the disruptions, which is technology.
Yes.
There are quite a number of other things that we need to look out for. And these include, for example, the gig economy. So when you're talking about, for example, the Jua Kali workforce, we need to change our perception from that Jua Kali should be a degraded kind of job and should be done by those who did not get opportunities in the other white-collar jobs. And therefore, in our psyche, it is placed at second or third in the echelons of work. So we are saying that in the gig economy that we are in, people do varieties of jobs. I'll be in my suit and tie in the morning, but in the afternoon I'll be in my Jua Kali, and that we should start having acceptance of the same.
All right. And on that, and of course, the redefinition of the job market, you know, Tony, in what sense has that changed, you know, the market in the country in terms of looking at the graduates that we have and, of course, the job market that is there and merging that together?
I'm of the opinion that our education system fathers itself. It's not about the things that we hear about you creating graduates for the job market itself. I think any education system in the world is about trying to expose critical thinkers. And from that, you are able to find that what is the problem that you're having within your setup, and then can people solve with their skills and expertise in solving basic economic problems, not basically economic, even social problems, and monetize it. So that's the best way to go around it. And you look at today that we have an independent kind of an economy that we have a big channel of people coming out of the academic side, and then the job market itself is very minimal. And that's because our economy in the informal sector itself is the biggest part that takes those number of people coming out of education systems. And so the challenge is that how do you make that funnel that is moving around, that people are tapped more, even in the informal sector, how do you make it a more lucrative place that many people can go to? And so that's the disconnect that we have today, that we are not really prepared, that we have very few jobs which are formal jobs, and then majority of people who come out of the system, education system, end up in the informal sector. So how do you scale up the informal sector that it's more of a high value sector itself?
For
and then
the people who are graduating.
Yeah, exactly. And then you are able to, that's the best way that you can develop as an economy. Because you look at the channel that is called human development capital. You come from the education system, and then you use your expertise and experience in trying to scale up in terms of business and solving problems that you monetize it. We are not, there seems to be a disconnect at some point there, we find that a number of people are employed, but the idea should be that how many people can solve problems.
Do you think this can be changed through policy, probably?
Yes. can be changed around policy. I think the biggest problem that we have is that we've more of an emphasis on the formal sector, job market itself. That most people concentrate on moving into the formal sector. So the policies that we'll need is how do we scale up the informal sector itself, that we call the Juakali, become a more high value and attract more and tap more human capital.
All right. Njoroge, you know, there are a lot of questions that come up about when people actually are seeking for jobs. They're probably graduated. And employers would say people, the graduates or the potential employees do not understand their value.
Yes.
Address this issue in terms of personal branding and people understanding what they're bringing to the table in terms of the personal branding that they have embodied themselves.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's a good question in the sense that a lot of, if we look at our education system, a lot of graduates are coming out of school, right? We have a lot of people looking for jobs. At the same time, a lot of employers are looking for employees who are qualified with the right skills, and there's a problem because there's a disconnect whereby employers are finding that there's a shortage of skills, yet we are saying that every time we're having graduates coming out. So what is happening is that, one, our education system has tended to be quite more theoretical and not focused on skills that are needed in the workplace. And so we need to have a shift in the mindset. Secondly, when you talk about education, what is the purpose of education? It's really about solving problems. You learn skills of how to solve problems in life. And so when you are leaving university, what are you good at? What skills do you really have? And what problem can you solve for me as an employer? Because the employer wants to understand, fine, no problem. You want a job, what are you going to do for me? And in most cases, most of the job seekers can't answer that question. And so many times when, for example, we've been involved in recruitment, people will call and say, I'm looking for a job, and you'll ask them, what are you looking for? And they'll tell you anything. I tell them, there's nothing called anything. You need to be clear, what is your value proposition? What solution are you going to provide that employer? Because at the end of the day, that is the meeting point. The employer wants a problem solved, and then the person needs to have those skills to solve. That's where the disconnect.
There's a gap there.
There's a gap there that we really need to address.
All right.
Yes.
And Joseph, even as we move forward towards that, and of course we'll be discussing a little bit more on that, there is a deadline for having all HR practitioners certified. That was set in 2020?
Yes, for this year in November.
It's actually 2019.
2020 November.
2020 November. And so where are we on that? The numbers of people who've already registered, and of course, you've made significant steps towards achieving that goal?
Yeah, indeed, because as the Institute of Human Resource Management, we actually regulate the workplace. We regulate the human resource practice. And one of the things that we are insisting on is that every supervisor at whatever level is a human resource person, because there's the specialization of the HR as a practice has completely shifted. Gone are the days where, you know, HR was doing the personnel work. Like at workplace, you've got a discipline case, can you rush to HR to sort it out? I need people to recruit, can HR recruit for me? I want to work out a compound ban, where is the HR? Because that is the space for HR. We are saying that has completely shifted. And we are actually devolving or giving out those HR skills to the line managers. And line managers are actually the first-hand HR managers, because they should be responsible. They should have the basic skills of recruitment to define what kind of job, to define the job, and actually define the job specs. So when it comes to the job definition, it is actually the line manager who defines that. The HR comes in with the expertise to say that for this kind of job, then you will need this kind of specialization. So you see that the first person in the front line is actually the line manager. And this, it's across all the HR functions, be it recruitment, be it the grievance management discipline, as we call it, be it compensation and benefit. They need to have scanned the environment. If I'm an engineer, I should be knowing the rates, for example. If I'm a doctor, we should be knowing. So what has happened about what is going on in the profession is that the profession becomes very specialized. Like Njoroge said, the HR space becomes the real experts thinner and thinner as they give more of the practice to the line managers. Now, for you to be in that practice, then you need, it's any profession, you need to be certified. And over a period of time, because we are still a growing profession over time, we have come up with a specialization, a certification requirement that for you to be a certified HR profession, then you must have you must attain 1, 2, 3, and all. So far we've graduated, I think, the 3rd class of the certified HRP professionals, and it is growing, and we are working towards that deadline. We are expanding that space by now encouraging people to go. We are starting very soon online programs to be certified, and there's a whole raft of minimum requirements for you to be certified as an HR, just like other non-professionals that, for example, the legal practice, the advocates, you must have. And very soon, and we are going through the amendment of the Act, we'll be saying that there are certain items or certain papers that must be signed off by a certified HR profession. Just like you cannot sign off accounts if you are not a CPAK, a certified accountant. So that is the direction that we are heading to.
All right. And on that note, Njoroge, looking at those dynamics and of course the changes with that, how would you rate Kenya in terms of how it's been responsive to the changing landscape, especially in the HR world?
It's an interesting question. I think we are still evolving. We have been a bit slow, and then again at the same time there's a lot of change happening simultaneously. But
on the right direction.
On the right direction.
All right.
And of course you see the expectations. For example, we have an issue today in the workplace called the millennials.
And we're definitely going to delve into that.
I think we'll discuss that a bit more. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Tony, I'd like to get your mind on the same. Do you how would you rate specifically, as an individual Kenyan in terms of the landscape that has changed so far? Yeah.
I think there are different views on how you look at where we are today in terms of HR. I think we have developed a number of expertise and skills in the region. I think we are among looking at our education system and the kind of people rely on. You find that South Sudan, most of the people come into an education system and get some kind of skills that we provide in this space. You look at exportation of capital from Kenya. We have a number of nurses, accountants, and those kind of professions out there. We've sent a number of them to UK, to spaces like UK. So I think in terms of human as a resource itself,
yes.
I think Kenya is in the right direction. We only have problems in fixing within the economy itself, that the number of people that we're trying to churn are not the people that
is it reflecting? It's not reflecting in the economy?
It reflects at some point because you talk about unemployment numbers.
Yes.
That's where it reflects a little bit. We have a serious unemployment issue, and it's a structural problem within the economy itself. That we tend to churn out people from the education system for the formal sector when the formal sector is very limited in numbers on the people they can absorb. And so what employers are looking at, because you're giving employers now to try and pick the best of the best out of that market. And so it's very few people who can be absorbed in that market. So where do the rest go to? So most of them end up in default as the informal sector itself. But also the problem with the informal sector is that it's a low value sector itself that many people try to avoid. So that structural problem needs to be fixed in Kenya, that you have an economy that works, that has a connect from the education side to the skills that you're preparing at the middle level, and then you're absorbed in the market. So it's a channel that needs to be refined more, and so it's a straight scale that you move from your skills, you're able to practice your skills, and you're able to add value to the market itself.
All right. Joseph, employers are no longer relying solely on, on technical skills. There's this thing they're calling soft skills. So how really important is that for a potential employee seeking employment and wanting to join the job market to embody this, not just having a technical skill, and of course we've discussed it in terms of not having just papers as a show, but of course embodying such interpersonal skills and people's relations. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Zainab. It is indeed true that, and I think this we'll be discussing probably in a few minutes in terms of what are these competencies that we are looking out for in the future of work. And that's a very interesting topic, that how will the workplace, how will the workforce look like in the future? And for me, a lot of emphasis today, if I sit in a panel of interviews and there are technical people with me in the panel, my role as an HR professional will be looking strictly at that. Because trust me, we have proven, even scientifically through certain research areas, that I would have done my undergraduate degree in human resource. Or rather, I would have done my undergraduate degree in engineering. And I've got passion for human resource. That engineer may make a better human resource professional than someone who was trained as an HR, believe me. And so on and so on. Some people got changed. If you look at the way careers are being managed and how they're proceeding, you would have done yourself, Zainab, I don't know what you did in your undergrad.
No,
but
and
probably you have a passion for what you're doing currently. So completely different, maybe in pharmacy. And here you are, maybe, doing this kind of job. So it is, what is it, how can we define and check out, especially for the younger generation, what is the passion, if they have not already defined for themselves? And because you deliver best in what you are best passionate about. So when it comes to, for example, looking at the issues of soft skills and managing people through that, you realize that today, what has happened throughout especially the British system, is that how we've been promoting people, we have been promoting people over time based on their primary technical knowledge. And that's not right. Because you find, for example, if I'm an accountant or an engineer at workplace, should there come a course on engineering, then we'll say, where are the engineers in this organization? Can they go? Where are the doctors? Because it's and then you continue emphasizing on that primary, yet you promote on the same. But the actual skills needed at workplace, if you're an engineer and you're starting to manage people, is not engineering. Now it is people management skills. And as you go further in your promotion, they'll realize that you need other skills and not your primary skills, like, for example, finance or accounting, or because now your scope has expanded, you're moving out from that line into broader general management, but we are still emphasizing on your primary knowledge. What is the result of that? The result of that is that you find a general manager in an organization still having a lot of allegiance and, to what they primarily do. So they actually skip. They're not interested in managing people at the general manager level, which is their basic requirement. They're not interested in managing finance, but they're interested in managing their primary technical knowledge. So they tend to give a lot of focus and concentration on their background and leaving, and then there's disruption. Then you actually promote people more than the level of, Peter's principle, the levels. So we end up having mismatch in places. You say, this is a very sharp person, but how come cannot work as an engineering manager? And that is now where we say soft skills are really quite important. And people got to know that the primary skills, the technical primary skills that got you into a job will not necessarily move you in the upper echelons of the job.
And you're right, Njoroge, even in our newsroom here, you have a lot of people who did not study journalism in school and probably did something completely different, business, and they found themselves in this industry. But there's an aspect here when it comes to training your employees, and I've heard of, employers sort of feel frustrated, say they're a bit frustrated in terms of they bring in people to join the industry, but they have to take them through a whole new process of training to give them the skills that they need, to perform their job. So what happens here then? Where do we move forward? Do we need to just ensure that when you go to school, of course, you need to learn get all the skills? I mean, where do we bridge this gap?
It's a big problem. I'll call it a big problem. I'm involved with career coaching. I give a lot of conversations at the university, talking to young people about skills and so forth. And it is true that having technical skills is the easier part. It's easy, you know, you go and do your accounts. How many people have CPAK? But how many of them will actually grow to be a finance manager? The soft skills should be an area that also in the universities should be emphasized on.
Isn't it an innate thing that just...
Unfortunately not, because, for example, interpersonal relationship. When somebody gets into the workplace, how do they behave and relate with their colleagues? And that relationship creates the work dynamics that has an impact on productivity. Now, that is not taught at the university level. So this is usually the gap. So there's a bridge whereby when I'm leaving college and I'm looking for a job, when I get into the workplace, I find myself not delivering because there are certain skills that I did not acquire. And most of us actually acquire these skills through practice over time. And since we know that, that's why one of the things, interventions that does help is, for example, coaching, because we coach people to be self-aware. Number two, I always say this, education should be foundational. We lay too much emphasis on saying you must have a degree in this for you to, you must have a degree in journalism for you to succeed in journalism, but yet you went to study that course because it was the only one available at the time. But if we are able to identify, and that's why I like the new curriculum, which is focused on competency. What are you naturally good at? What is your talent? And then we start investing that talent early enough. So by the time now you're getting into your career, it's already very clear that this is where your strength is, this is what you're passionate about, it comes naturally to you, and you're not a mismatch when you know, in terms of fitting into the workplace. Yes.
And talking about the mismatch, I mean, okay, there's a new education system now in the country. Do you believe, Tony, this will be able to curb or help in terms of leveling out, you know, those who graduate and of course seeking their jobs and with the skills that have been able to get with the new curriculum?
I think on paper it looks to be the same, but my opinion is that you look at why 844 was introduced. It was kind of the reasons that we're giving today about the competency-based curriculum that we're introducing. Especially one of the main concerns has been that we need to produce people from the education system who are self-sufficient and can be entrepreneurs. Same thing was done in 1980s when the 844 was brought. So the question that we should ask ourselves, where did we fail in the 844 itself that we can implement in this thing?
That's something we've not been able to
Yes,
discuss.
because for anyone, if you're doing public policy, you start with the problem itself, hypothesize the problem. What was the problem that we had with the 844 system?
All right.
And then, so what is the solution that we provide? Can we fix the 844 itself, or do we need a new curriculum? I don't believe that we will achieve the targets that we say in the new curriculum, because we've not answered the question that
Why the other curriculum
yes,
failed.
when the same reasons were given for introduction of 844 itself. Yes.
All right. And we're going to take a very short break. But before that, of course, I'd like to remind you of our social media platforms. You can engage with us at NTV Kenya, Zainab Ismail. The hashtag today is AM Live. We're discussing the HR profession sphere in the country where we are and moving forward. But before that, Joseph, of course, taking a look at being a regulator, and I'll come back to something that Njoroge had mentioned. You know, we have different generations now in the job market. We have the Y generation. We even have now the Z generation of coming, and these guys have completely different needs when it comes to working and, of course, being in a work environment. Some are not even motivated by things, let's say, for example, pension and mortgages. So how do you then, as a regulator, come in terms of policy making, bring in the needs of these young people to align with the expectations of a company?
Yeah, very well, thank you. The Institute is a a regulator, but we also have the laws in place. So one of the things that we have done and we are championing is the amendments to the laws. Number one, you know, currently we are amending the Employment Act. And if you see the first article in that act in terms of the major changes in that amendment is flexibility, flexi time at workplace. And that is totally new. I'll tell you what that will is today, a very important conversation on the multiple generations at workplace. We are in a time, and this has been said over and over again, where we are having about 3 or 4 generations at the same time, at the same place, with totally different wiring, so to speak. Because as if I'm an older parent and I've got very young kids, I completely do not wire, I'm not completely wired the way they are. But you see in our systems, for example, today, in public sector, in government, if you want to get to be just a director in government, do you know how many in terms of what we call the career progression guidelines, what they give? Because on the minimum at every position, on the minimum, you must have at least, and this is the crazy requirement, and has worked for the last 50 years, you must have at least 3 years work experience in a particular grade. And then 3 to the next, 3 to the next. For example, if I want to become what you used to be called before, a district commissioner, for you to get to a district commissioner level in government, or what today we call county commissioner, it is about 7 or so, or 8 levels on the minimum. And on each level you must, and that is minimum, remember, do at least 3 years. A young person will come and look at that and say, this is rubbish. And if you monetize it and say, oh, after how long will I attain this? They will not take up that job. Most of them will not, and they'll say, I mean, then what we do is we insist, because that is what we know we are comfortable with, especially in the public sector. If you want to attain this is where all of us went through, so you really must. So kind of fixing square pegs on round holes, it doesn't work. And that is why it has been very difficult to attract younger generations in government. That is one of the reasons. But besides that, the adoption of technology, and because the younger, the millennials, would want to, they will not do this paperwork at workplace. They'll get bored of a short period of time. There are a lot of efforts that have been made to influence policy. For example, you had Public Service Commission just recently announcing that we are going to have jobs on contract. While we appreciate that, yes, there must be stability, some baseline on some stable people who are on permanent and pensionable, but at higher levels in government, the job group ASP, you know, where it's really managerial, then the positions become, they're on contract, and it is more exciting for the younger generation to work because they want to change places. We now today know that they're not even keen on careers. They're keen on passions and the things that the millennials are keen on. What have I achieved? They're also keen on what kind of legacy, how would I change this world that I'm living on? And therefore, while it is true that the workplace is having this kind of mix, we are saying that human resource professionals should really manage people's expectation, because it's all about people management. It is how do we manage these people's expectation so that they redefine again, once again, the workplace. You'll find...
But how far are we from actually achieving that? I mean, it's always been so rigid.
Not, but I can tell you there's in the last couple of years or so, the flexibility that has happened in government offices is amazing. Today you go to certain, not just government, I mean public service, you find they have modern offices, for example. They have flexible policies at workplace. They have over and period again, because today we are competing with the same human resource as the private sector. That is the truth. You have seen, for example, the pay grades in government. They're not bad, and I mean, people would get interested. The only challenge that now is faced actually in government is not really skills, but it's productivity, because of addressing how do we do the KPIs, for example. What are the KPIs? So for me, the missing gap is productivity. We've got competence, we've got skills, I think, but how to turn these skills to be productive, that is where the challenge is.
All right, and Tony, I'll get your mind on that, on the productivity and how that actually affects and hurts the economy. But before that, Njoroge, of course, you raised the point, and of course, liberal minds, young minds, you know, can't work 8 to 5. It's crazy. You know, they're actually asking, you know, I'd rather work for 3 hours and I'll give you, you know, a lot of, I'll give in all my best. And they, you know, they're like, some of these things, they want changed. Are we almost accommodating everyone? Where are we at?
I think we are struggling. And the thing is, we have multiple generations in the workplace today. The older generation, who I consider myself to also be, is struggling to really understand
The younger generation.
the younger generation. I'll tell you why. Because, for example, in my early years when I got employed, the workplace was very structured. You know, you knew this is a process to be followed. We were scared of our managers. Sometimes you'll actually see your manager and you turn a corner and run away. The younger generation want to deal with your managers as peers. They want to be respected as, you know, as equals. They want to have a say. They want to have a conversation. They want to be also consulted on issues at the workplace. So that, you know, if you're an older generation person and you're seeing a young person who is now challenging you to consult them on certain issues, then it starts creating an interesting dynamic. So I find that one of the things when I'm having conversation with employers is that the employers also really need to work hard to make the adjustment itself, because this young generation isn't going anywhere. They just keep getting younger and younger. And so they have challenged the status quo. So the workplace dynamics really has no choice but to change. Just to give an example, just recently we were doing some interviews on sales, and look at the technology that has, digital technology has changed the whole dynamics of the sales, how sales are done. Initially it was traditional, knock the door and try and sell. Today, everything you have, you know, the young person is there with the phone and they're actually getting things done. You know, an employer may question that and say, how will you be able to sell using, you know, this will not work very well. So, so the employer, even away from just policy, also has to adjust to the reality today.
Change the mindset.
The mindset has to shift to appreciate that there are new sheriffs here in town and their way of doing things is different. So how do we adjust to accommodate them so that we can also continue to be a productive organization?
All right.
Yes.
But they have to meet somewhere in
They have to
between.
meet somewhere in
All right.
between, yes.
Tony, I'll come back to you. But we have to take a short break here on AM Live. Of course, our discussion is on the human resources sphere in the country. Remember, you can be part of the conversation on our social media platforms at NTV Kenya, Zainab Ismail. The hashtag is AM Live NTV. Let's take a break. We'll be back.
Hello? Yeah, it's me. Okay, baby.
Can I buy a chocolate, please? It's for my mom.
Hey, your change.
Happy birthday, Mom.
Thank you, Bella. There's a class and a half in everyone.
Nation FM. More music and less talk. Nairobi 96.3, Mombasa 101.5, Meru 93.9, Nyeri 104.9, Eldoret 102.7, and Nakuru on 97.7. Follow us on social media on Facebook at Nation FM, Instagram at Nation FM, and on Twitter at Nation FM KE. Nation FM. More music and less talk.
Africa's funniest gig is back on Friday, 26th July at KICC. Africa Laugh Festival with the UK's funniest girl. First time in Kenya, Jambi McGrath. Arthur Nkusi from Rwanda. Koi Nzungu from Tanzania. Ticha Mpamare. Agnes Akite. Salvador from Uganda. And a hilarious Kenyan battalion.
Eric Omondi.
And Churchill. It's gonna be serious laughter. 2,000 bob VIP and 1,000 bob regular. Grab your ticket now at churchill.co.ke or dial *229 *29#. Africa Laugh Festival, July 26th, KICC.
There was a whole debate the other day around, the age of consent. What are your thoughts on that conversation?
It's actually just creepy old people who want to have their way with children.
In 2017, according to the UNFPA, we had almost 500,000 girls between 10 and 19 get pregnant. Are we trying to decrease this number or are we trying to increase it?
A lot of people feel like even schools get it wrong. We can't really say the S word.
But also our teachers were embarrassed. They were like, so many page. And then they moved on. I don't actually remember learning in school. It's my mother who told me.
All right, thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching AM Live, and of course, today we're discussing about the human resources sphere in the country. There's a very interesting tweet here by Chris Opio. Chris Opio says, the problem isn't appointments. What we earn is service delivery. I think I don't know what that he actually meant, but we'll get more details on that. At Paul Wangia says Tony, we had that song before. I think you were discussing about, you said something to do with we need to scale up the informal sector, Juakali sector, to make it more lucrative to the youth who lack formal jobs. He says, Tony, we've had that song before. Have you worked in that informal sector, Juakali? Tell us how it is. It's tough. He says it's tough. True?
Yeah.
All right. We also have, let me get one more tweet here at Jacob Abere saying, HR in this country is software in every HR in this country is software in every discipline in financial, public, and health management. I think he meant to say HR is very important in every discipline in the job market. We were discussing about, of course, the young generation, the millennials, the Generation Z in the job market. But something very important that Joseph mentioned was productivity within the job market. Yeah. But then productivity can translate in terms of, the economic development on a global perspective, and of course in the country. How does that work?
Well, I think Joseph explained it very well, that the public service is able to attract the best competence, the best expertise and skills. But I think the problem specifically is about productivity. How do you motivate people within that space that they're able to deliver according to the customer satisfaction, which is the taxpayer on the other end? And so you look at the kind of setup that we introduced around the Huduma number. You look at service delivery within that space. I think that's one of the main things that we got it right in terms of service delivery compared to the previous governments in terms of engagement with the citizenry. I think that is the mode that we'll want to see in terms of productivity, because how quickly are people served? What are the response of other people? How do you manage the taxpayers or people who are coming for services within government services? How do you manage them and they're able to get satisfactory services? I think that is the biggest issue that we have in the public sector. And so In terms of human resource, I think that's where Kenneth Joseph comes in. They should come, and how do you advise government on motivating people that productivity is high? You scale productivity in the public sector, because that is the biggest problem we have in public sector itself. That the problem that you'll talk to anyone, service delivery within public sector doesn't meet the expectations itself. And so you find that quite a number, like we go to applying for a passport. I think it took me, when I was renewing my passport, it took me around a whole day, queuing and all those kind of process. So that's a day wasted. So those are the things that, in terms of productivity, you look at the country's.
Is it lack of motivation, perhaps?
I think it's just management, the human resource itself. How do you manage human capital that are there, that they are able to? Maybe they're not pleased with the environment, the workplace itself. Maybe they're not motivated enough. Maybe they're not given sufficient key performance indicators. So there are a number of things that HR people would want to look at in that space. And how do you motivate people and they're able to get service delivery to the best expectation of the taxpayer itself? Okay.
All right. Joseph, just to dissect that a little bit more, of course, there was a study done, I'll get that exactly where it came from, but it said that the reasons why people actually leave jobs, the number one reason was a toxic work environment at 32%, and at 28% was the salary and the benefits. Do you think that would contribute to the low productivity within, especially, public service?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. If you look at reasons why people get dissatisfied at workplace, the perception has been it is salary. Trust you me, research and research after research, even in this country, has shown that that is not the real cause. The real cause of dissatisfaction at workplace is basically the workplace environment. And, you know, relationship between you and your supervisor, relationship amongst colleagues and all that, or small little soft things, as you called it earlier, of recognition. You have done all this and I'm not recognized. So those are, honestly speaking, the reasons why. But I want to emphasize a point here. You know, there's this outcry on, again, going back to public service, that public service officials are overpaid and this salary is too high, and, you know, I can tell you without any doubt that that salary is not that high. The reason why Kenyans are complaining is because they're not seeing the results of what they're giving in. If you are earning, including our members of parliament, earning what they're earning, and the citizenry can see real results, there will be no complaint, because then the economy will automatically grow, isn't it? Because then you are producing much more than you are giving you in. But the reason why there's a big problem today is because people are not seeing you are investing in the people, but you're not seeing results as employers. So that is why there's a huge outcry. There was a study done again by SRC not so long ago, 3 or 5 years ago, and it showed that our productivity is at 0.3. That is, I mean, at 30 or less %, and that is the best in terms of what the potential that at workplace that you have and what you are really producing. It's that low, you know. Ideally, in other developed organizations, Google, for example, there are people going up to 70, 80% of their potential to actually produce. So you can see that, and then there's a whole reasons why that productivity is low. Either the usual, the workplace environment, the employment of technology at workplace so that you can produce, the, you know, the blocks, the legal infrastructure. I would have done this much faster, but you see, the law says this and this and this, so we have to go through, you know, all that. There are all manners of reason, and this is why we are coming in as regulators and say, hey, the world is really moving. It's really moving fast. Can we get all these things that are blocking our way, because we want to look at productivity? You can see what local examples, Safaricom and all that, what they're doing is, in terms of productivity, they're not solving today's problems. The R&D or the research part of it are actually looking at what are the future problems. So before the customer actually demands that I need this and this and this, they've already provided that plus what the customer, they have gone beyond customers' expectation. Look at what probably in the media industry, where I think you're most familiar, what you're doing is, you know, the basics of here is information, But you do much more more than information entertainment, because you have assessed your market and said, this market, yes, they need this, but for me, I want to go beyond. So in our organizations at workplace, what we need to prepare our people is that how can you satisfy your customers beyond the expectation? And unfortunately, in the private sector, we are still struggling. At times, the employees or the service is already beyond us, you know, in terms of what. So there's growing demand on, please, we are demanding this and this and this. So in a nutshell, I want to believe that if we can have mechanisms, and we correctly say, and that is what we are struggling with today, a lot of effort has been put towards the end of productivity. Today, if you look at what SRC is doing, and that is why they're working, really working hard, they're saying equal pay for equal work done. And if we can achieve that, then there'll be no hue and cry.
All right. Njoroge, you'd like to add to that?
Yes, just to add on to that. What are we talking about when we're saying productivity? It's about the output, all right? If I come to work today, what am I going to achieve, and how is that measured? One of the challenges that that we have is also about the culture at the workplace, right? I mean, Joseph has talked about the public sector, but the reality is that the journey is that there has been a culture whereby when you start to introduce performance measurement, there's resistance. Why? Because all of a sudden people realize, I will be exposed. The reality is that a lot of workers will not give you a lot of productivity. They will not give you even 40%. They will not do it. However, in my opinion, if you look at the private sector, because it works well there in most organizations, the first thing that requires to be done, when you hire somebody into a role, you need to define clearly what they should be doing, clarity of expectation of that role, and make sure that they have got very, very clear performance indicators that say, Njoroge came to work today, this is what he has been able to achieve at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, and at the end of the year.
But most companies actually fail to do that.
Most companies, there are many who fail to do it. And this is really the work of the line manager, to be able to, because the line manager is the one who owns the workforce. You know, they're reporting into him. So he is the one who is supposed to be very clear, what are we as a department supposed to be achieving? And so what does everybody contribute in terms of productivity towards our goal? So the goals have to be set, and the goals must also be managed effectively. So that's where the gap comes in, whereby we are saying, yes, we want productivity, but do we have a process whereby we are able to create a culture where people focus on delivering what is expected from them? That is possible to do because it works in other organizations. So where it's not happening, then the organization has to actually ask themselves, what kind of culture do we have here? Toxic workplaces, as you mentioned, also affect the work environment, and there are very many factors that create that. Could be, well, maybe the managers contribute to that. Could be peer problems. All right, there's so many things that actually happen to create a toxic work environment. It will always affect productivity.
But then again, how do you then address this to achieve a win-win situation where you don't have an employee who is actually using your resources to hunt for another job?
Clarity of why that person is there.
So you just have to set the objective.
It has to be very clear. This is the way I always look at it. By the time you are hiring for a particular job, it has a purpose, right? When you're hiring a general manager, it should be very, very clear what he's coming to do. That should be very clearly defined. So what happens is that a lot of times we fail to manage those employees by having clarity of what they're coming to do for us within the organization.
All right.
Yes.
All right. All right. Tony, do you think employers are really listening to their employees?
That's an interesting question.
Exactly.
I think an interesting question for more of the HR experts and more. But I think one of the main things is that answer your question from the question that you asked him. I think one thing I've heard is that for an employer, you need to prepare the current millennial generation. You need to prepare your targets for an employer for around 3 years, because after 3 years, they always feel that they need to move. So you work on short-term targets, and so you get the best out of it within the short period, 2 to 3 years. And so you're able to motivate them and work with them within that short period of time. And so I think the problem will be a channel of where we have constructive discussions and engagement between an employer and an employee on how do you get the best out of somebody, and how do you discuss issues and solving problems within that marketplace, within your business itself or within your organization itself. So I think the issue is that the transition probably, I'm not sure about private sector, but public sector, that's the biggest problem. But you find employers, especially guys who are in managerial positions, that have a disconnect with people behind them. It's straight down, that roles coming from up and down, and there is no engagement on how do we do service delivery as a team itself.
All right.
So that's the biggest issue within the public sector.
And can you say that probably one of those issues is the age difference? Let's say,
Probably.
for example, from the board, where you have the board, you have those, and rightly so in the experience, 50 years and above.
Yeah. I think that one would be a factor, but I think the biggest issue is a culture of a top-down model, that instructions always come from the manager, and you down there, you are there to implement.
Okay.
So you don't create a good teamwork in terms of service delivery.
All right. And Joseph, then how do we then come and bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's interesting about the issue of age, and I'd like to say this, that at times when it comes to flexibility and adjustment, it may not be age-related. I've witnessed that myself. We've got young people at workplace, relatively young, 6 or so years in the work. In government, believe me, or in public sector, that is young. And they have very old thinking because of the way they were inducted, at workplace. Very rigid, old, because the supervisor, he or she had at induction, told them, after 20 years, you can be here. So,
This is the way things
you're
are
working
done.
towards your pension. Remember, you will have children. And if you lose this job, my brother, da, 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 da. So you find that person and say, files must move in this way. Stuck. And he's a young man. Conversely, you'll get very aged, mature people who have adapted to technology so fast you can't believe it. They're online, they're tweeting at their 55 or 60s. Yeah? And they're superb. So age, yes, could be a factor.
But those are quite few, right? Let's agree on that.
Njoroge, I don't know. I don't want to disclose your age, but you are on top of things. You've got Twitter handle. I was telling my dad the other day, you must get into Twitter and all that. And he's in his close to 80s. So, okay, no, they may not be as fast and as what, but you realize that, yes, age is a factor. They may not be as flexible as the younger generation, but it's also in our psyche. So for me, I never dismiss. And remember, also, you cannot discriminate on account of age. And that is, I think, the reason is that age really does not define. It makes it affects it, but does not really define how you produce and how, because the people who are very advanced in terms of technology, in terms of understanding issues, in terms of embracing diversity and all that. And just allow me, Zainab, to just say the 4 points that I think are important in terms of the future of our workforces or our workplace. And I think you've already mentioned one. And I want to demystify certain ideologies that we've had over a period of time. And number one is technology. And when we talk about technology at workplace, what comes to our mind at first is artificial intelligence. That we have this, we are grapped with this future. And that's everyone's talking about this, that our work, our jobs will be gone because machines will come and take over. That for me is a big myth. What artificial intelligence does at our workplace is actually it changes the work. It changes how we do perform work. I was watching yesterday news on yesterday on NTV, and I saw the flying man. I don't know how many of us watched news NTV last evening. That technology and that will be the movement. So we've moved away from that truck drivers and all that. Of course, that will be automated in the near future. We won't have people driving, you know, human beings. It can all well be automated. But we'll be going into another level of asking ourselves or saying, how do we regulate the airspace so that these drones and all that can be delivering to... So there's a job already for that person who will be regulating and looking at the frequency, whether you privatize those frequency, as opposed to... So what technology will do is actually changing how we work and
But
how
let
we
me
do
ask,
things.
are we actually prepared for this wave of change?
This is it. Not are we actually prepared, how well are we prepared? Because it is, of course, coming, and that is why we're having very active conversations, in, especially in the technological space, that, hey, we may look like we are slow as a country, and this is our state, but ideally, the moment that a lot of even government services are going on online platform, today, you will not get a job under Public Service Commission if you don't apply online. Today, you cannot file your returns, you know, with paper. It is online, 100%. So we are already moving, however slow it is, but you can see there's, and what now needs to be done is escalating that speed, is moving with speed. Secondly, is the issue which you've also discussed about the multiple generations at workplace, because it is disruptive. Because Joroga has just mentioned very well about how do these people relate, the younger generation, I think like yourself and some of us, and now what are your expectations? You see?
Yeah.
Issues of the gig economy where an employee, you've mentioned, is busy, and because in the old thinking, you want to say, what time did you arrive at work? What time are you leaving work? Have you arrived at 8? Did you leave at 5 or you left at 4? But we do not quantify what this employee has been doing between this time, and they could have actually been busy looking for another job. In human resource space, we must start knowing that it is actually possible for someone to do 2-3 jobs at the same time, and it is happening elsewhere in the world. So these are the myths that we, I would have wanted to demystify. And I think last and most important is also the issue of diversity and inclusivity at workplace. That is a big one. We take it for granted, the issues of gender, issues of people living with disability and all that. But you know, in our psyche, I was a human resource practitioner for a long time, trust me. I'm one of those old guards, and I don't know whether I'm correct. When you had a degree online, I was really doubting. I was, is this degree equivalent to mine? And these perceptions, you know, like, and during our time when we started practicing real HR, we were, you know, this person is from a certain country, maybe it's from India. You know, this degree is from India. And in an interview panel, and we were not saying graduates from India bad, but in our psyche, we believed that these are not really the best. So we need to demystify those things and come to a realization that even in our country today, the millennials are already thinking about being global citizens, you know? So for me, the thinking about us as Kenyans, especially now looking at human resource, which is very fragile and very dynamic, as we want to focus on the human resource in Kenya, as an institute, for example, we are going to, we are actually hosting the Pan-African Human Resource Movement. We are working towards free labor. I mean, where you can work anywhere globally. And we really must prepare our employees today for that kind of global citizen. And what are they sensitive to? Personally, it took me a long time to say, okay, I've got extra coins. When I'm traveling, I can actually take in that I want to pay a little more coin for carbon emission. It doesn't occur to me. I mean, how does it affect me, for example? But I'm saying these are the things that now the younger, they are looking at, what is it that I'll be known for? What is it that I can do so differently, other than being in a workplace as statistic?
All right. And I know in March this year you held the first conference for women, the Women in HR Convention.
Yes.
Why did you target women in this specifically?
Actually, the target was we are moving away from this talk of empowering women. No. And we were telling women in HR that it is very difficult for someone to empower you. To remove power from anybody to give, it's a nightmare. So you already have this power. It is how you use that power. And we are going affirmative, of course, you know, in the HR space, in terms of statistics, there are more women than men, but we are looking at the workplace environment today in Kenya. We've not reached there. Our neighbors are doing better than ourselves. So the purpose for that was to encourage the women at workplace, to encourage others in terms of capability, to know that there's no differentials at workplaces. And this was to demystify those thinking that certain jobs are for males or male dominated. And it was very interesting conversations around agenda, around the capabilities of women, the various capabilities that women have in what is so defined as male-dominated workplace.
All right, and I know you have to leave, Joseph, so thank you so much for your contribution. Of course, we'll continue with our conversation here. Joseph Vincent, the chairman of the Institute of Human Resource Management, he's going for another meeting, so thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know you want to add something to that?
I just want to add that just for information, and this is our HR month, and we're having a golf tournament this 27th at the Vet Club, so we want to invite all of you who can actually come, and we are going to network with people so that we show the value of HR. We are having also Career Festival at the University of Nairobi, which will happen on the 21st at the Chancellor's Court, and we are telling young people, please come and look at career choices. And HRL, we did sensitization breakfast meetings on diversity and inclusiveness. And we're having a lot of CSR activities, visiting children's homes, telling them the importance and telling them that actually people management is a profession. I'd like to end by saying that we are actually moving away from HR to people management so that we do not look at a human as a resource. The human is not finance. Human is not really a capital per se. And right now what we are doing at the Institute is to start creating the thinking of seeing the human person at workplace not as a cost center, but as a value center. So that we, even as employers, start treating the human resource as humans, as opposed to as just resources at workplace.
All right.
Thank you, Zena.
All right, thank you so much, Joseph. Well, Joseph will be leaving us